Hello everyone, welcome to Story Vault YouTube channel. Hope you enjoy the video. What was the scariest, we need to leave now, gut feeling that you've ever experienced? Part 2. Story 1. Years ago, before cell phones, I was driving home from dropping my husband at the train at 4:30 a.m. Only me and one other car on the road. He started turning where I turned twice, so I didn't go home. I went to an all-night gas station and called the police. I gave them a description of his car. 3 weeks later, he was arrested. Turns out he was following women home and driving past their house and doubling back to rape them. No one had noticed his car. I'm glad I paid attention. Comments. Great awareness. My husband used to say I'm crazy that I do loops around our area if there's a car behind me when I turn off the main road to our little road. I tell him I'm not having some weirdo follow me home. He got followed by some crazy road rager once with our son in the car and had to pull a couple U-turns to lose him. He doesn't think I'm crazy anymore. People are. That's happened to me. I pulled out of a difficult junction where the roads dips down, so it's hard to see oncoming traffic when you're coming out. Didn't notice the white van coming up. I didn't even cut him off. It was just a bit too close. Anyway, he tailgated me all the way down the road like a lunatic. Absolutely unhinged for something that was a minor mistake. Luckily, I remembered there was a nearby police station, so practically swerved into this side street on 2 wheels where the station was and pulled into it. That got rid of him. He drove straight past, haha. I've also driven past my house and doubled back if the same car has been behind me for a while and I'm driving at night. Better to be safe than sorry, and my gran once got followed home at night by suspected muggers because she worked in a shop. Story 2. Years ago, when I was still living at home with the parents, I drove home around 2 a.m. As I parked my car, I noticed a man walking down the street. I decided to wait until he passed my car and was far enough for me to get out. However, instead he passed my car and hid behind the van that was directly parked behind me. I guess he did not think I was paying attention to him. So I called my dad, who was asleep, to come down and get me. He did, and when the guy saw my dad, he immediately ran away. I was lucky. Comments. Reminds of a night I was closing up at work in high school. I worked at a pool hall till midnight, one-ish on weekends. One winter night I locked up and went to my car, which was parked next to the front door. Started it, then got out and scraped ice off the windows. As I was getting close to done, a guy walked around the side of the building, on the same side of the car as I was, passenger side. It was late and dark, and I don't normally see anyone, so I decided I was done scraping and walked around to the driver's side and got in and locked the door. I locked the door just as this guy passed the driver's side rear bumper. He then slowed a little, and a second guy came around the corner from the same direction. He waited for guy number 2, and then they walked off together. Spooked me right out. Possibly just someone waiting, but also possible they were going to grab your car, or worse. My dad jumped out of his car on an empty street as he hadn't closed the boot trunk properly, and it popped open. A guy appeared seemingly out of nowhere and made a beeline towards the open driver's door. So my dad grabbed his hatchet from his tool bag in the boot. The guy was just about to reach the door when my dad shouted and waved the hatchet, causing the guy to turn around and sprint in the opposite direction like something out of a cartoon. Story 3. I was in Taco Bell with my daughter, and I saw a guy come in and back out with a t-shirt over his hand. I told her to dump her tray and get moving. We went out to the car quickly and left. Found out later on the news that the guy robbed the place with the gun hiding under his t-shirt. Comments. Yikes. We were playing in the McDonald's play gym, and the SWAT team came busting on. Full armor, guns, telling people to not move and hands on the tables. Went around in the back of the kitchen, signaled all clear, and left. Apparently a man had escaped from the prison nearby, and they had a perimeter set up and were checking every building to locate them. I remember my mom saying it was a murderer, but I don't really remember. That was one of the last straws for my parents, and they decided to move out of the area. Story 4. I bartended, and years ago I kicked this guy out because he was acting very strange, muttering under his breath that he would kill my other customers, just really hostile. He had missing fingers on one hand, and he was kind of a bigger guy. After bar close, I was almost finished counting money. So like an hour after everyone left, and I was just about to leave, and I had that gut feeling. I looked out the window, and that guy was standing on the corner watching me in a ski mask. I know it was him because of the build. As soon as I grabbed my phone, he took off, but the cops know who he is. Now he has a vendetta out against me, and he's well known around town. He's fucking nuts. Story 5. Wednesday midday, run along a beautiful river pathway near my apartment block. About 1 kilometer, and I felt people watching me and directly turned around and ran home, even though I did not see anybody. Closed the 2 magnetic gates leading up to my door and didn't see anybody around or follow me. About 10 minutes later, 2 guys were at my front door trying to push it in. I was luckily on the other side of the door at that moment and pushed it back closed with all my force and began screaming. I managed to security lock the front door and text my apartment block for help. I was on the 2nd floor, and they obviously watched which apartment I went into. Looking back at the apartment's security cameras, they were able to see the 2 guys pull apart the magnetic security gates, 2 of them. The block then quickly changed the gates to a mechanic lock that cannot be pulled apart. Story 6. My brother and I were kids, playing hide and seek in the front yard of our house. My brother was 3, and I was 6. My brother was supposed to be counting and finding me, but he was taking forever, so I peeked around the side of the house to see what was taking so long. He had lost interest in the game and was standing near the front gate, which led to the street. As I'm looking, I see a brown car pull up with 2 men inside. The car wasn't familiar, and neither were the men. They both got out of the car and approached my brother. They started asking him questions and moving closer to him. I remember feeling panicked. I had learned about stranger danger in school and knew this wasn't right. I ran around the side of the house, flew through the back door and screamed, "Someone is trying to kidnap Steve." My dad didn't hesitate. He got up and flew through the front door. When the men saw my dad coming through the door, they bolted and peeled out. From that day forward, we weren't allowed to play in the front yard anymore. It's a really scary memory for me. Story 7. In college, I was studying at my school's business school building, waiting to meet a friend, and I had a sudden sense of dread. I texted my friend that I would just meet her at her dorm later instead of meeting at the business school, and I left to walk to a nearby library instead. When I got to the library about 20 minutes later, I checked my phone and I had nearly 20 missed calls and texts from my friends who knew I was at the business building. Literally seconds after I left, a student entered the building and stabbed multiple people, killing 1 professor and injuring several students. It happened in the room I had just been in. Story 8. I was at the state fair with my mom and my best friend. Friend and I were looking at the rides and the games. This creepy guy and his blonde girlfriend kept babbling at us about taking headshots and that he was a modeling agent. He just seemed off and really sleazy, and the girl was giving me the creeps, so I pretended that I saw my mom telling us to come and grab my friend and dragged her off. She was close to 5 feet 8 inches and not a small girl at 13 years old. I was 4 feet 9 inches and around 65 pounds. At 14 years old. A few days later, there's a news story and rumors going around the school about 2 girls being kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered. They were taken from the fair the same day we were there, just few hours later. The creepy couple were Gerald and Charlene Gallegos, serial killers. Comments. Wow, I just went down a 2:30 a.m. Wikipedia deep dive on this. How wild that you were so close to being a victim. Story 9. I was walking down the street in a very unfamiliar city with a group of friends. I got this feeling and didn't know how to articulate it, so I said to the group, "Hey, I've got to use the restroom. Can we just duck inside this subway real quick? I promise I'll be quick." About a minute later, there was a shootout just up the block. If we wouldn't have gone into the restaurant, we would have all been standing right in the middle of the incident, waiting to cross the street. Story 10. I was scuba diving in Asia. 3 of us went to a reef that hadn't been dived on before, which bottomed out at 50-70 m depth. 5 minutes into the dive, we all get a very bad feeling like we were being watched. Ignored it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Further 10 minutes into the dive, we all watched the silhouette of a white shark glide slowly past, right on the periphery of where we could see, then glide back in the other direction a minute later. The decompression stop to get out was the scariest 3 minutes of my life. Story 11. Was hammock camping while riding my motorcycle through Arkansas. I had a dream that I was getting pulled over by the cops on my bike. The flashing lights were super bright in my eyes. And as I woke from my dream, I noticed my blue hammock tent is lighting up like flashing police lights. I immediately felt an adrenaline spike and went into full flight mode. Packed my shit up faster than I could even put my boots on, hopped on my bike in my underwear, and rode a mile to the top of the campground where the showers were. The second I stepped into the shower cabin, the sky opened up and cloud-to-ground lighting started striking trees in the campground every 10 to 15 seconds. I could have been royally ducked up by a lightning strike had I stayed sleeping between two of them. Story 12. About a year and a half ago, I got out of a concert hall and I was with my FWB, her friend and her friend's boyfriend. We walked across the busy street to a bar, 2:30 a.m. around this time. Got a quick tequila shot and a drink to end the night, and we left to call the Uber. We were sitting on the side of the road on a curb waiting for the Uber, and there was a group of people that walked to our side. They just looked like bad ducking news, and they were just looking to cause problems. I look at my FWB and pulled her up. She looks at me like, WTF, at first, and then she saw the, we need to GTFO, look in my eyes, so she turned around and said, we are going to the other two. Once we got up, not 5 seconds later, bang, 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 and I felt like I got a painful splinter in the back of my leg, but we ran to the cop car across the street to get some cover. Turns out, I got a fragment of the curb that we were sitting on where the bullet hit exactly where we were sitting in my calf. It was a wild shot that just happened to hit where we were sitting. Unfortunately, someone died that night, and my gut feeling saved my friends or myself from a fatal gunshot that wasn't even intended for us. The only reason I knew about a piece of stone embedded in my leg, and it wasn't just a muscle pull from running, was because a cop responding and running by us while we were standing behind the cop car, and he saw blood on my leg and thought I got shot. A quick statement and ER visit to fish out the half-marble-sized shard of stone in my calf, while absolutely wasted, and I was on my way home at 6 a.m. I didn't really put it all together until I got home thinking, holy moly, I can't believe I'm alive right now. Story 13. Years ago, I was at a club with some friends. I was at the bar and for some reason looked down at the other end of the bar and saw two guys quietly arguing. They tried to keep from being overheard, but I saw their agitated face. I went back to my group of friends and told them we should go. This was a popular club, and it took us forever to get in, so they didn't want to leave. I don't know what came over me, but I picked up my friend's girlfriend, she was barely 5 tall, and started walking to the door. She was kicking the entire time, and the rest of the party followed me outside, telling me to put her down. When we got outside, we heard the distant pop pop and people screaming. We looked at each other for a second, then ran for our cars. I forgot to put her down and was still carrying her over my shoulders. Update. Dang, I didn't think this would blow up. It was the early 1990s, and we were at a club in Miami. If I recall correctly from the local news, it was a drug deal that went bad between two groups. No one was killed, but they wounded each other and a couple of innocent people. LOL, I'm still not carrying her today. The legend are false. Those two eventually got married, and they mentioned me in their speech. Something about the other groomsmen holding me back so that I don't get the urge to carry her across the doorway. Story 14. Many years ago, I went with my then-girlfriend to one of her female friends' houses, who was married to a guy I'd never met before. I'll call them Jack and Jill so I can tell the story a little easier. We played cards with them for a couple hours, and it was a good time besides an odd feeling I had the whole time I was there. Something just didn't sit right with me being there with them in their home. The best I can explain it is that I was having an anxiety, nervous-like feeling, but having no reason to feel that way. After leaving, I told my girlfriend the feeling I had, and that I didn't think we should go back there again because something wasn't right. Fast forward several months to a year or so later. I forget the exact timeline. Jack murders Jill in that same home, Mag dumping her with his semi-automatic pistol before killing himself with one of the last rounds. No motive. Really horrible stuff that sent shock waves through the community. And it's the only time I've ever had that feeling. Story 15. My wife and I used to live in rural exurb outside a large metropolitan area. We were on an interstate about halfway between the city and our home when my wife, who was 6 months pregnant, started having contractions. At the next off-ramp, I turned around and headed back towards the city, planning on heading for an ER. I took the very first exit on the outskirts of the city. It was pretty desolate. The only thing on the 2-lane road were a couple of rock quarries that were empty after dark. There wasn't much light on the winter-darkened evening. I pulled into a gravel turnout just south of the off-ramp, pulled to a stop, leaving the engine running, and turned my full attention to my wife. A few minutes passed before my attention was grabbed by a car parked across the turnout, turning their headlights on with high beams. My wife grabbed my arm and said, "We've got to get out of here." And I was like, "Yeah." So I dropped it in gear and hauled ass down that 2-lane road towards the city. The other car gave chase for a while, but I was flooring my car. I drove a Dodge Stratus. Eventually, we got into civilization, and the other car turned around and ducked off. We spent the night in the hospital, narrowly avoiding the premature birth of my son. He's 17 now. We guessed I didn't notice that my headlights were shining on a drug handoff, my attention being on my wife, and it pissed the other people off. But who knows? Crazies are everywhere. I was at a family gathering, basically a reunion, but just for family within reasonable driving distance, probably 30 people altogether. It was at County Park on a small lake with some grills and buildings, just an empty hall with some picnic tables inside. You could rent for this kind of stuff. The sky started darkening as a storm was approaching. All the coolers, chairs, balls, and other kids' toys, etc. were brought into the building anticipating the rain. The plan was to wait it out since afternoon showers are common just about every day in the summer. Something in the air didn't feel or smell right, even though it appeared to be just a regular afternoon storm. Hair on my neck was standing up and I was in full flight mode. Can't really describe it. The feeling in the pit of my stomach can only be described as absolute dread. I told my wife to take my daughter and get in the car. My brother-in-law took one look at my face and said, "What's wrong?" Apparently, I was white as a ghost. It wasn't even raining yet, and I was full-on panic, yelling for everyone to leave. Something isn't right. No one else was that worried, mostly concerned with how I was acting. I went out to the car, and as soon as I was about to turn the key, the tornado sirens went off. We were not far from wherever they put those, or they are just stupidly loud, because it was deafeningly loud. Now the rest of the family is pouring out of the building to their cars, kids crying, and I look across the lake, maybe a few miles in the distance, and see a funnel cloud. Got the hell out of there, as did everyone else. The building we had rented for this family barbecue thing was completely annihilated. Literally just a slab of concrete and a shit ton of debris all around. It was hit dead on by an EF3. I live in an area where tornadoes aren't common. One day there was a big storm coming. Weather Channel is giving a tornado watch, which in the past, I never put much stock into. I don't know why, but this time was different. I was sitting in my recliner with my German Shepherd at my feet, watching the news closely. I felt for some reason I should wrangle my cats and put them in their carriers in the basement. Worst case scenario, I figure. Nothing happens, and they spent 30 minutes in their carriers. No big deal. I go back to my recliner to continue watching the news when the sky suddenly turns green. Everything feels wrong and surreal. I tell my wife to get in the basement, and I pick up my Shep and carry all 105 pounds of him kicking and screaming down the narrow basement steps. My feet hit the basement floor and the pressure suddenly drops. We hear a thunderous roar and the windows upstairs shatter. It felt like an eternity in the 30 seconds it lasted. Then there was nothing. I creep upstairs and peek out the basement door to find every window blown out. The recliner where I had been sitting not 3 minutes prior was completely covered in shards of glass, which I would have taken to the face if I hadn't hauled ass. It turned out the tornado went directly over our house. Windows were destroyed. Roof was destroyed. Fence completely gone. Porch ripped from the house. Trees down absolutely everywhere. I'll never forget how something in my gut said to take it seriously, and listening to it saved my life. Comments. There's something about the air before a tornado. I had a similar experience when I was in HS, babysitting 2 young girls. We were in their living room playing next to a big picture window, and I remember looking outside, noticing how it suddenly became very dark and still. I moved them to the other room without windows so they wouldn't get worried. 5 minutes later, my mom texted to make sure we were inside. The sirens were going off in her hometown, about 20 miles away. It was being obliterated. 200-year-old brick churches torn in half. Thankfully, all the damage was material. My family is from the South and lived for a while in Tornado Alley, but they now live in New Jersey, so tornadoes are not a thing for them typically. However, a few years ago my mom woke up. My mom never wakes up. It's a joke in my family that we wouldn't be able to wake her up even for a fire. While my dad wakes up if a bird flaps its wings outside. in a sheer panic and woke my dad up saying they had to get to the basement now. He argued with her thinking she was having a nightmare and thought they were back in Kansas or something, but I guess she seemed freaked out enough he decided to just do it to calm her down. Within 30 minutes a tornado came by and blew out their windows. He says he'll never question it again. Something about the air pressure and silence must have shocked her body into realizing what was going on before she even did. That's insane, but I fully know that feeling. When I was 8, my family was driving home from our summer holidays. My sister was only a few months old, and my parents were definitely tired and wanting to get home as quick as possible. While we were driving, it started pouring. At the same time, I was unbelievably car sick and begging for my parents to pull over. My dad pulled into a Tim Hortons, and my mom took me inside to the bathroom. I remember not throwing up, my mom being annoyed that we had to stop just for me not to be sick, and then trying to find my dad's car in the downpour. We got back in the car and back on the road. Both my parents not believing I was sick. Not even 5 minutes later, we're back on our route, and the road is an absolute mess. Trees and debris everywhere. My dad pulled over to talk to someone in a truck, and he said, "You just missed it. A tornado just blew right through here. You missed it by seconds." My parents changed tune and just knew I must have sensed something that day. So, that's the end of the video. Hit the like button and subscribe. Have a good day and see you in the next video.